Welcome to this week's bonus episode for our Patreon community that makes the show possible. To listen to this full episode, join us at Patreon by subscribing to the show at patreon.com/gaslit. That's patreon.com/gaslit. And you'll get all episodes ad-free, bonus shows, join the conversation with our community, submit questions for our weekly Q&As, and more. So this week's bonus show is based on questions from our listeners subscribed at the Democracy Defender level and higher, and there are questions about China, including China in relation to the Israel and Hamas war. And I just take it so much further than that because there's been a lot going on with China that we need to pay very close attention to, as always. So we'll get into that. And thank you everyone who submits questions for our Q&As, because it confirms that we're all being kept up at night by the same concerns. And you shape the show. Your questions shape the show. So before we get into all that, I want to thank our Gaslit Nation community, the listeners that showed up for our recent phone bank with Virginia with Sister District. We got incredible feedback on that from Sister District. They said it was their largest phone bank this election season. That is thanks to us, Gaslit Nation, all of you listeners that showed up. You know, many of you, like me, showed up not even wanting to phone bank, right? And then by the time it was all over, I was so energized and it was wonderful. So I'm going to be making more phone calls heading into this weekend through Election Day, Tuesday, November 7th. You can sign up for a shift with me and Sister District. I'm going to be working the afternoon shifts, like around 1 p.m. Eastern Time, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And you can find a sign-up link for that in the show notes for this bonus show, wherever you get your podcast. So sign up, come do a shift, make 10 calls, 20 calls, do whatever you can manage in the time that you have. I know we're all very busy and dealing with a lot and dealing with our own collective grief. By pitching in together, every little bit helps. And also phone banking is so easy because most people aren't home. And the ones you do get on the phone genuinely need a reminder or help on where to go to vote on Election Day. All right, so another exciting announcement. Gareth Jones, the hero of my film, Mr. Jones, one of the first things he did when he came back from the Soviet Union, where he basically took this illicit trip into Ukraine, he used his Gareth Jones swagger. He name-dropped his mentor, Lloyd George, the former World War I Prime Minister, to convince the Soviets to roll out the red carpet for him and show Westminster all the Soviet might, the factories being built in Ukraine. So Gareth was very bold and brave and full of the idealism and ambition of youth to do such a thing. And thank God for humanity that he did, because he became an important independent voice on one of the worst atrocities of the 20th century. And as he took his trip into Ukraine, he eluded his Soviet escort and walked by foot alone, seeing ghost village after ghost village and interviewing people on the verge of death. One of the first things he did when he got back to the West was he spoke at the wonderful independent think tank. And I know I'm going to botch this. It's Chatham House. And the wonderful folks there, by chance, reached out for an interview about the Gaslit Nation graphic novel, Dictatorship, It's Easier Than You Think. And they asked to do a Twitter space. And so I'm going to be doing a Twitter space with the same think tank that featured Gareth Jones all those years ago. And this is purely by coincidence. The wonderful gentleman that I spoke to there didn't know that the real Gareth Jones had in fact been there, and that it was such a powerful and important platform for him in 1933. So here we are 90 years later in November 2023, which marks the 90th anniversary of Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine, and it's all coming full circle. So if you would like to join that Twitter space, I will be live on Wednesday, November 8th at 10:30 Eastern. And I'll link to information in the show notes for this episode. I'm thrilled for this opportunity. I feel like it's a wonderful cosmic nod from Gareth Jones himself. I don't know, that's how I'm choosing to think of it. But yeah, so I'm really honored and thrilled, and I hope you'll join that Twitter space on Wednesday, 10:30 Eastern, with the wonderful folks at Chatham House. And forgive me, I'm dealing with a lot right now with a seriously ill loved one in my immediate family, 2 little babies, and World War III. So I'm trying to keep the show going the best I can. So I forgive me if I flub as I go along. Another thing I wanted to point out, I hope you all had a wonderful Halloween. You got some spooky time with your family or got to enjoy it somehow. It's one of my favorite days of the year. I like to watch a family-friendly spooky film every Halloween. Normally, it's the Cary Grant classic Arsenic and Old Lace, which takes place in Brooklyn. I love it. That's my go-to. But this year, I thought I would spice things up by watching the new Disney film Haunted Mansion. And I'm so glad I did, because I need to share this with you. It's ridiculous, but you need to hear it. If you plan to watch this film, shut off this show right now, because I have some spoilers here, and just fast forward for like 60 seconds, okay? Here come the spoilers. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. So the main villain of Disney's Haunted Mansion is an unloved son of a real estate developer who had a ruthless father who rejected him, and the high society that he so desperately wanted the appreciation of that also rejected him, setting him out as an outcast. And he comes back having amassed, as an older man, he comes back having amassed a mysterious fortune through nefarious means that has led to the deaths of countless innocent people. And he's now this tycoon who's deeply misogynistic, proudly misogynistic, I should say, and proudly petty, and has married 3 times, including cheating on his wives. And guess what this villain's name is? Crump. I kid you not, the name is Crump. Maybe this is all coincidental, or maybe it's Disney's woke agenda. I just think the whole thing is hilarious. And if you watch Haunted Mansion, you'll see that the fictional villain is our very own real life villain. And if you want to watch an exorcism of Crump, definitely watch Disney's Haunted Mansion. It is very satisfying for that reason. Now we're going to talk about China a lot in this episode because listeners had questions related to China. So the first question is from Deborah. I wanted to know what kind of game China and Russia are running with the disaster unfolding in Israel and Gaza. China seems disgustingly opportunistic. Yep, but Russia looks to be just a little more. Iran clearly is complicit, but I can't help but think that Russia loves the idea of Ukraine not getting nearly as much coverage that Putin might have had a hand in the funding. Oh, right, the fact that the U.S. will definitely be sending money is going to get the kindergartners in the GOP up in arms about continuing to send money to Ukraine. Or am I just being paranoid because Russia has been so evil everywhere else? Deborah, everything you brought up, we just did an entire episode on it featuring Olga Lotman, the Russian mafia expert, and the analyst Monique Kamara. They are the 2 brilliant hosts of the Kremlin File podcast. We did a big deep dive into Russia's long history of funding and working with Iran-backed terrorists. So so you are right on the money there. If Russia stands to benefit, there is more than likely a Russian connection. And we know there is one in plain sight because the leaders of Hamas are visiting Moscow for a reason. But we're going to deep dive on to China specifically because there's stuff in regards to this war and things that we should be more vigilant of in regards to China. So China has a long history of supporting Palestine going back to Mao. Both the Soviet Union and Communist China supported Palestinians, sending weapons and other support. Seeing Israel as a U.S. imperialist project, much like Taiwan. That's China's view anyway. So in the current conflict, Chinese nationalist bloggers who are aligned with Xi's regime, Xi's dictatorship, have been staunchly anti-Israel in this conflict. An Israeli official was stabbed on the street in Beijing, and people walking by just did nothing, didn't get involved in that, just kind of watched it happen. And China has been, historically aligned with currently with the current machinations of these dictatorships with Iran and Russia. China is sending financial aid to Russia. China is sending tech that Russia needs to keep its war machine going. One of China's closest trading partners is Iran. And neither China nor Russia has condemned the Hamas October 7th terrorist attack. They've been stridently stronger towards Israel in this conflict. But China does have opportunistic ambitions here. What China is desperate to do is to counter the U.S., to be an alternative to the U.S., And that requires building credibility. So China wants to present itself as a peacemaker, somebody that could bring Iran and other states to the table for a potential peace deal, brokered in part by China and potentially the US bringing Israel to the table. And that's not a small thing. Xi and Biden are slated to meet later this month in San Francisco. That's been something that's been in the works for a long time. They have a lot to talk about there. I'm going to get into that in a second. But in terms of this current war, China's positioning would be to present itself as an adult in the room, somebody with credibility that could potentially bring peace, but never mind that it's carrying out its own genocide against a Muslim minority, the Uyghurs. That's how China would opportunistically take advantage of this, because China also does not want a regional war. It is hugely dependent on Middle East oil. And again, Iran is one of its closest trading partners. So it's in China's best interest that the war is contained, that the war is stopped. And given that Xi and Biden are meeting soon, potentially that could always fall through given how fragile things are, but that meeting seems on currently, and or in the works certainly. And so there's opportunity there for a US-China brokered peace deal potentially by bringing their close allied nations to the table. So we'll see, fingers crossed. Now let's talk about the agenda for Biden and Xi. This is a big one because with tensions rising over recent years, since certainly under Trump, but since really 2017, when Xi did his big power grab and consolidated power, one of the first things that Xi did, and keep in mind, he is a Trumpian figure through and through. He is thin-skinned. He clamps down on all opposition. He's nationalistic. He comes from the military branch of the party. He's very much cut from the same cloth as a Putin, for instance. Like the rhetoric used under Xi's regime against Taiwan is very similar to the rhetoric used by Putin's regime against Ukraine. And one of the first things that Xi went after when he made his big power grab and basically made himself dictator for life is Taiwan. And there was even recently a big report released justifying all the reasons why Taiwan is really an extension of China and must be neutralized, must be absorbed in order to get rid of a threat right on China's border. So the big signs of an impending annexation of Taiwan by China are there. They are there. Whether China actually goes for it, I mean, that would be a big gamble for China, given how Russia has slipped on its own banana peel in Ukraine. Russia has exposed itself as a house of cards. Everyone used to think Russia had the second most powerful military in the world. It turns out that Russia just has the second most powerful military in Ukraine. And Russia has also just shown, having lost a historic number of top military brass in this conflict so far, like a massive number that military historians are going to be laughing at and pointing to for generations to come. Russia has really revealed how inept it is. Putin had that big embarrassing military coup against him by Prigozhin and so on and so on. And so Xi is thin-skinned enough to maybe think that Taiwan might be his own banana peel. Let's hope that he's calculating that risk. That is the reason why the Democratic Global Alliance, including Japan, is funding Ukraine, keeping Ukraine going to defeat Russia and Ukraine to deter Xi and his big old dictator ego. This is a real deterrent. This is a real meaningful way to try to contain China, because China is led right now by a nationalistic, militaristic dictator who's clamping down on all sorts of freedoms inside China, which we'll get to in a second, because this is notable for us in a later discussion in this episode.